Hey everybody, Jazz Cabbage Cafe. Barely got this up and running on time in the, what is this, the Causeway Bay Hotel?
Causeway Bay Hotel, Lansing, Michigan. And here at Jazz Cabbage, we support Ukraine. So,
And Sensi Magazine is putting on a Mardi Gras night. There'll be consumption here. There'll be a bunch of industry participants with booths and showing off their products and talking to people. Should be fun. I'm looking forward to it. I'm happy to be here to do the broadcast, and I am looking forward to today's broadcast because once again we are going to discuss harm reduction. You know what though, but before we get too far into it and I forget, let's jump on some awesome sponsors here and just recognize those guys, and then we'll get into some conversation. Here we go.
Jazz Cabbage Cafe is sponsored by the Botanical Company, Redemption Cannabis, Family Solutions,
I have no idea how that sounded, but the
Super
music
loud.
has been drowning you out lately. But I'll have to fix that one of these days. Plus, I have another image to put in there for 420 promos. We got lighters from 420 promos. I worked at Grosse Michigan at a booth for Glenn, Glory Lakes Expungement Network, and brought in some Jazz Cabbage promo material, including brand new lighters provided by 420 promos. And I gave away 150 lighters in about an hour. The place was busy. And then there was like this regenerative seminar conference taking place across the way with no-till soil, a lot of very, natural approaches to integrated pest management, nutrients, everything. And it was really interesting too. Had a good time checking that out. So today, hopefully later on when this thing gets up and running, Botanical Company is here as a sponsor. So we'll be hanging out there a little bit, but also Sons and Daughters and Glenn should be here as well. And we'll be hanging out talking about the great work we do there. And some of these organizations here have donated to us, which is the way in which we're able to really function, because it's really expensive to do these expungements. They average between about $500 to $1,300 a piece. Here is attorney Paul Tylenda joining us.
Hi.
Ooh, that doesn't. Hey, Paul. There you go.
Hey, Paul.
How you
So
guys doing? You guys
good.
together, where are you?
Go ahead.
At Causeway Bay Hotel, we're here for the Sensi Magazine Mardi Gras party. It starts at 6 p.m. and coincidentally, our show ends at 6. So why not just do a live broadcast?
Fat Tuesday. There are a bunch of punchkis in this room. There's like several huge boxes filled with them here. I can't wait to dig into those things.
I'm losing my Polishness. I didn't remember that it was Punchki Day until about 9 o'clock this morning. I'm like, God, is that today or is that next week? But yeah.
Well, you're not getting any from the formal bakeries. You might be able to go to Kroger or something.
It's funny because I'll usually try to go a couple days before Punchki Day or like a couple days after. It's when all the commotions died down and the Punchkis are still, they're available pretty much year round. So they're just not available in all the variety and the fun. Standing in line for 2 hours for a box of donuts,
Right on. So I was just starting to, before I remembered the fact that we had sponsors and needed to recognize them, I started talking about how today we're going to get into another harm reduction conversation. The last couple times we did that, it's been really interesting and very popular for a lot of people. And we had Pam Lynch, who heads up the Harm Reduction Michigan organization in Michigan, based out of Traverse City. We had Becca Newman and Becky Redham, who are part of the independent group of researchers. Becca also works at Wayne State, but is part of this. After the study moved out of Wayne State, it became an independent research group, and she stayed on for that. And between her and Becky and others, they just, outside of the study, just help people out quite a bit, because they know that is very positive for a lot of people's quality of life and to help them out. So just a lot of good stuff. And because of some of these shows, we got a lot of extra help from caregivers and others around the state. There's probably some more of that needed, but we got a great response I'm very proud of, just from this show. So
that's awesome.
We'll be able to continue to talk about that a little bit more when Brad, who's going to join us, he's a well-renowned researcher, Dr. Ray, who's now no longer in academia. He still does research, but when he went to Wayne State, he made it one of the provisions of being there that he gets to start one of these harm reduction studies based upon cannabis and dangerous substances and that kind of stuff. So that's how it all got started. And we talked about this on the show before. His wife is the controller at the company where I am, and that's how the introduction was made. And it's just turned into a really cool thing for all of us. Again, so
small world.
Yep.
Small world.
So we're looking forward to that. And then the other big news, which I won't cliffhang too much. It's out a little bit to some people, but after kind of a long time of working on it, today is the day that Representative Rabhi will be introducing the deschedule, taking cannabis off the state's controlled substances list bill.
It's about time, isn't it?
That's big. It's got a lot of implications. It's got a ton of implications. I mean, it's got one of those the what I would call like the dumb legal references, where they make just a blank reference to in some law or some rule about things that are on Schedule 1, and without further distinction, it clumps in cannabis with that, and it makes things a problem that are in conflict with the MRTMA. So when you get around that, it sort of is it's a great justification. It's a huge acknowledgement, but man, is that a cleaning up of all the lingering issues of medical cannabis and recreational cannabis at this point.
We talked about this a couple of times in the past, but really, child protective services issues, banking issues. I mean, this is a statewide change, but it's certainly, we hope, would be forbidding for a federal change also. So many different ways it can help.
So for Andy, no, it doesn't mean that, because there are subsequent bills that have penalties written into them. So those would stay in action. And then there does need to be a companion bill that comes later. The idea, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit more with Rep. Rabhi, maybe we won't, but the idea is that we will form a work group, the work group that's been missing for the evaluation of not just this, but other proposed cannabis language and change that we've talked about a lot on the show, and potentially new stuff. And there should be a group of stakeholders, people with meaningful input. It's bipartisan, it's well-rounded, and that should be part of a fair process when determining whether or not we're going to change the laws, whether or not we're going to put new language in the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act, or many other possible combinations of things. And so that should be part of this process too. So we don't necessarily expect this to get the momentum to hit a committee to get the 5301 treatment where everybody just gets in on it and wants to make sure that it gets through. But we do expect it to begin to help us to sow the seed. I mean, I will say, like, this is one of these issues that once I've been able to really discuss it with almost anybody, there's not much defense for keeping it like this. There's just a glaring conflict in these laws, and the older laws got to go. And we don't treat it like it's a Schedule 1. We tax it. We tell people to grow it, or allow people to grow it and to travel around with it and to pass it around. And we don't treat it like that.
And it occupies two spaces on the schedule, both Schedule 1 and Schedule 2, which is just in conflict with each other. So we just need to take it off in order to. How can our children have confidence in government when they see contradiction like that being embraced?
It was funny, or not funny, but what's obvious about that is that at the point of consideration, and the Schedule 2 thing came by way of an old bill called Senate Bill 660. I don't know what the public act is. It did pass, but none of it becomes active until or unless federal government reschedules, at least off of Schedule 1. And so part of that bill created this new thing called, I think it was called medical grade or pharmaceutical grade cannabis.
Grade cannabis.
And that's on Schedule 2. So we're taking that's stupidity off as well. And
that's ridiculous. It strikes me, and there may have been, I don't know if this is part of the lawsuits that Comorn has gone down with, but it strikes me that the letter of the law, the language just written on the page of the cannabis laws, does in fact create the conflict that would, let's just say, have the cannabis law supersede that scheduling definition by the implication and ultimately by the preamble of the MMP. And it would work in the same way of the language battles that we fought, through the 2010s of it says this here, this has a supremacy clause, the sub language over here conflicts with it, and thereby it's gone, ultimately voiding out that part of the law. And even with the way that Schedule 1 is written is that you can void out one or any of those and the schedule still stands because they're separately itemized to be eliminated. So you can just take cannabis off of it and it doesn't practically change anything about the other Schedule 1 systems, and it brings it again more in line with saying you can't say cannabis is legal and then say these certain things are not legal with Schedule 1 substances. That's it. Those are the inherent, but that's the end game. That's how law and politics often work, and that's where we need to clean up that grandma's old house language of problems, which is this has been around for so long and no one's thought to do anything about it, but it's antiquated and needs to be, swept out.
It does. I mean, I wish we were thinking about this or in this frame of mind, and it's hard to get there because it's relatively new. I wish we were in this frame of mind right in 2008. I mean, we started seeing should have been talking about that glaring conflict then. Instead, the discussion from those who were evaluating the law would say, this is just this narrow exclusion in law. If you meet all these, requirements or standards or stuff, then you can narrowly escape it still being illegal by carving out this little segment here because of these conditions. It didn't have to be looked at like that necessarily.
No, and for those that are maybe not understanding, Schedule 1 status means that it has absolutely no medicinal value. So in 2008, when we passed the medical marijuana law, we thought that automatically meant that it was no longer eligible for Schedule 1, and that by default it should probably just come right off, Paul. And that is not what happened. So.
And that becomes the funny part about it is that there's this idea that in like with the MMP, right? Should we have done this in 2008 and things like that? I think the problem that we're seeing, that we've seen all throughout cannabis laws, is that the laws can't imply, right? They can't say, again, like the battle we had with what internal possession meant.
Yeah, Robert Francis, you're wrong, by the way.
Right. Well, the state can't take it off the federal controlled substances list, but it can take it off its own controlled substances list, and that's what we're trying to do.
They're all dual
Correct.
listings. And for those of our listeners that don't have video available, Robert Francis
You weren't very nice about the way you said that.
I'm terrible. I'm a horrible man. Everybody knows this. It's Mardi Gras. I'm out to be evil today. Unfortunately, since it's scheduled one, unfortunately, state can't remove it from the control list, Robert says, and it has to come on the federal level. But as Jamie and Paul were pointing out, there are two different lists, a federal list and a state list. And in other states, there are variations between those two lists. We've added things here to our list in Michigan, specific things that we've discovered over time that may not necessarily be reflected on the federal list. So it's not unusual for them to not be the same.
Yes, exactly right. But that was saying is that with the laws we've seen through cannabis through the time is that the language can't imply anything. We can't fight with the language, and even if we make it clear, it can't be too clear, right? We can't have a law say nothing shall be the sum of 1 + 1. People will fight over what the hell that means till the end of days. It has to say nothing can equal 2, because that's the clear language that you can't dispute. And that's the problem we face in cannabis, is that the language is clear for those who wrote it, but because it didn't specifically say this hereby deschedules cannabis from Schedule 1, right? People say, oh, it doesn't exist. There's no way for it. And again, going back to you can't have dispensaries. The law doesn't say dispensaries,
Well, now I'll point out too that just like in the 2018 ballot initiative program, in the 2008 ballot initiative program, you're very limited in what you can put on the back of that ballot. Michigan law requires you to put the entire language that you're proposing on each individual piece of paper that people sign, each petition. So you're limited by the amount of space you can put on there. So there are many times
you don't have to carry around like something this thick for each individual one.
Exactly right. So you don't always have the opportunity to have as full-fledged of a program as you would have liked to have had straight out of the gate, which means that sometimes there's an interpretation. Brandy Zink, of course, president of our Michigan chapter of Americans for Safe Access, says this was discussed in 2008, but Marijuana Policy Project wanted a, quote, model bill to copy in other states. Marijuana Policy Project ignored this conflict between Schedule 1 and medical because they did not want to create more complications. They would harm the success at the ballot.
Regardless of that, I personally wouldn't have cared too much about what MPP thinks, and I would have tried to make an issue out of this conflict, particularly after it passed. I mean, that's mainly what I'm talking about too. But I appreciate that, and I appreciate Brandy pointing out that people were at least thinking about it.
There's a historical perspective that we usually bring here at Jazz Cabbage Cafe, and I'm glad for Brandy to be able to help us out with that.
Well, that's Brandy. Brandy touches on something very important too. Is the and we suffered with this a lot, and we made the most of it. But it was the same way as to say that we couldn't complain about how we got in the door because we were in the door. Was there's a lot of vagueness, and a lot of people suffered because of the language. But the political intent was to say, here's the language that polled very well. Here's the language that was acceptable to the public. So here's what was ultimately going to be generally reasonable to the state of Michigan, and it ended up being so, despite certain counties fighting it every bit of it.
Well, and one of the things that we didn't include, or that they didn't include in 2008, was a distribution system, a registered medical marijuana store policy. And it was thought in 2008, actually 2007 it was drafted and elected in 2008, it was thought that would be a poison pill, that if you included any kind of a commercial establishment like that, then you were likely to fail at the ballot box.
Yeah, the stories of all the raids in California and things like that would just seem to have a negative connotation attached that they wanted to try to avoid. In hindsight, though, many people now, given the 63%, favor of the vote, we could have lost 10 points plus, and still gotten something like that a little bit more defined.
Well, I look at it too in the way that the lack of let's call it lack of retail language was the benefit and the creation of the caregiver system, is because the caregiver system was not a centralized system. So if you had a retail system that said, okay, you can have 20 licenses, at that time, the fear was the feds could come in and say, okay, we got 20 licenses, we're stamping them all out. Whereas with the caregiver system, you created a plant in every home, ultimately, to where the distribution system ideally couldn't be snuffed out by the feds coming in and kicking down 20 doors. It was to be universal and throughout the state, and ideally untraceable, untrackable, unregistered, other than this state card, which would certainly supply marijuana in its traditional form, in traditional sense.
30,000 caregivers in Michigan right now. It was up to a high of about 45,000 at one point. So that was a very successful idea. Divide the responsibility up among so many people that the feds can't take interest in it and can't pick us off easily.
That's exactly what Brandy's saying. Tens of thousands of small gardens can't root them all out and get rid of that program as you could if there were just 10 large ones, as the oligopoly models would have.
Yep.
Yeah, so exactly correct. It's one of the reasons why we want to protect it too. There's no reason to give it up. So we're going to talk to him a little bit more directly pretty soon, but we are joined by Dr. Brad Ray. How you doing?
Hey everybody, how you doing?
Very good. So I know that I'm not sure if Rick, if you wanted to get to some of the issues that you posted about the meeting with Andrew Brisboe and the Consumers Organization and the different topics that you got out during that discussion.
Sure. As many of you know, I meet with Director Brisboe and a small group of consumers to advise the Marijuana Regulatory Agency every month. It's called the Consumer Connection. And we talk about a variety of different things. We have about 1 hour. We talk about advertising. We talk about labeling. We talk about labeling a lot, especially remediation labeling and proper cannabinoids, including terpene profiles. We talk a lot about things related to our industry and consumers. But this past Monday, Anton Harb, I was hoping Anton would be here because Anton is on that committee with me.
He's on his way, supposedly.
See what happens here. But we talked about a wide variety of subjects, including conversion oil and the process by which, there's Anton right there. We were just mentioning his name. The process by which conversion oil is created. We talked about the native tribes too. That's been one of the things I mentioned. I teased a little bit and got a lot of interest on was a discussion about the native tribes, and it was very, very brief. I just wanted to make sure that the bills that were introduced just recently in the Michigan legislature were crafted with the advice and the help of the MRA, and it turns out that they were. It's one of the reasons why the native native tribes in Michigan have been so receptive to some of the proposals that are included in those legislative issues. There really wasn't anything substantive. Certainly there are things that he can't talk about. We always ask him about Veritas lab scandal and and all of that stuff. And of course, they can't speak about any of that because they're under a court situation still. We have been joined by Anton, and then off camera we have Mike Brennan also.
420 Post.
Anton, you were there at that meeting yesterday too. What stood out in your mind from our conversation with the director?
I think the biggest thing is how receptive he is to, listening to the consumers, especially regarding, remediation. I think from a consumer perspective.
Can you guys hear him okay? Okay, just
Am I
making
okay?
sure.
All right. I would say from a consumer perspective, we're being listened to. And I think that the MRA understands that people want to know what's in their products. And I think that their openness to listen to everybody, I think they're really taking the time to hear everyone's perspective.
That's good.
We did talk too about the newly constructed website, the state of Michigan's redone website. So there's some information it's difficult to find right now, but they're trying to transfer everything over to. Some upcoming dates, of course, on the 9th of this month, Director Brisboe will have a 1-hour session on 420 Post. So you definitely want to check that out. And then I believe the following day on the 10th, isn't Director Brisboe doing a guest appearance on the iHemp Hour?
He is.
He is, yes. So we'll have 2 opportunities. So if there's anything that we don't cover on the 9th, we might be able to catch it with him on the 10th. And he also just announced another session too, a social equity session, where they really made it clear that he's just going to open the floor. Anton, he talked about that yesterday too. Just going to open up the floor and let people basically talk about whatever they want and be able to get to questions. Social equity, of course, is primary, but anything that we have as far as questions about, he's always very open. I mean, we've encountered him many times in a lot of different places. Director Brisboe has spoken at some of the events I've hosted. He will stay and answer questions until there's nobody left to ask him a question, as long as time allows.
I know the hemp folks are real curious.
Let's get Mike.
Here's Mike. You can hand him the phone too.
There you go. You want
Oh, is that the camera?
There's the
It
camera.
could be like.
All right, here we go.
Yeah.
I was going to wear my Mardi Gras mask. I probably should have. Anyway, so yeah, I'm on the iHemp Hour with Dave and Blaine, and they're real curious about how this whole thing's going to play out too, because they've been under the control of MDARD, and not all of it. Anything that's smokable or consumable now goes under, what is it, the Cannabis Regulatory Agency now?
Yes, CRA.
And so they don't know what's going on either. So there'll be a lot of hemp folks that'll be tuning into that portion of the show, which is at noon on Facebook, and you'll be able to see that when the hemp folks ask him all these great questions
Tomorrow?
So no, on the 10th.
On the 10th, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
Next week, that'll be Thursday for the iHemp Hour next week, and then next week on Wednesday for
Week tomorrow.
420
Okay.
Post.
Yep,
Yes.
it'll be on 420 Post on the 9th. And that'll be more of our focus, obviously, on the cannabis stuff. But, if there's some hemp questions, so be it, right?
Well, at this
So-
particular time, I mean, we're really seeing a combination of the hemp and the cannabis industries when their administration's being put under the same banner, so to speak. And with the conversion oil, we really are sort of muddying the lines between what's cannabis and what's hemp. And to be honest with you, we've been calling for this for a long time. We've been saying one plant. It's really one plant despite the chemical composition. So
Now, did you discuss the connection or the relationship with the tribal land policies
We did.
with them also? Because I thought that you had posted that.
Yeah, that's another one.
And I was curious about if that includes having to bring the tribal policies under the umbrella of the state law, or is just a way to be able to have a relationship with the tribal places no matter what policy they
and
choose
opt
to
in
implement?
and opt in
Yes.
kind of thing.
Okay.
So tribal entities could continue to remain on their sovereign lands and not opt into the Michigan regulated marketplace. The advantage of opting into the regulated marketplace is that you can tap into all of the regulated supply chain. So the testing labs, all of the cultivation centers, the millions and millions of extra pounds of cannabis we're going to have here in the next couple of months from all the oversupply. We talked about the excessive amount of licenses being issued by the Marijuana Regulatory Agency for cultivation centers, including one which has 40 stacked C licenses. One place. So we talked a lot about that, and especially the independence, the ability for tribal entities to maintain their independence even if they do opt into the system, there are still some things that they'll still remain in control.
Director Brisboe I think he's been very passionate, and he's worked very hard on the issue, and I think it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, in my opinion, the ship has sailed to try to like have some kind of homogeneous or uniform system across the state, including all of those individual places. So I'm happy that that's kind of the approach. It makes a lot more sense.
What you really don't want to do is to try and force people who have federal sovereignty.
Yep.
I almost said it wrong again, Jamie. Sovereignty. When you can't really force them to follow your rules, you can give them the pathway to do it, which we did not do in the 2018 legalization program. We didn't feel like we had the authority to command the tribal entities, and we did not. The legislature creates a pathway that we probably couldn't have done through ballot language.
So part of the story, though, just for a reminder for people, and we've had, and I can't think of her last name, but Whitney, who was the lawyer. Whitney Gravel, who was attorney for Bay Mills in the UP. Her story includes trying to contact the state for over a year to try to get some type of a recognition of the new system that they want to get up and going, or maybe even get guidance or whatever the circumstances may be to try to work in good faith with the state, and did not receive a return call for over a year. So they made the decision, we're doing this on our own.
And that means that they're using, in most cases, their own independent supply chain, or also using caregivers for cannabis supply, much in the same way that the regulated market did when it launched both for the MMFLA program and then also, again, for the CRMLA program, too.
Is there anything else about that meeting that's of interest you'd like to?
Boy, Anton, we talked about we talk about a lot of
There were a
stuff
lot
in
of
1 hour.
topics.
It's hard to imagine how many things.
And they want to hear you.
Yeah.
Like, the entire work group, it's like ideas are being spun and things are getting talked through. And yeah, for an hour, we covered a lot.
We did talk about advertising too. I think we agreed that we may be single-handedly propping up the billboard industry in the state of Michigan right now. I think we joked a little bit about that, but anyone that travels on any of our expressways knows you get a lot of cannabis billboard advertising.
And ironically, there is legislation that's been introduced this session that would prohibit that from being the case. It's not going to get any traction. It doesn't have enough support, but that's just,
that's the
just
contradiction.
an idea of the craziness that's out there.
Between the reality and the successes that we see, and then people that still look at our successes as failures. They look at the things that we think are as wins as coincidental damage from the war.
I don't want to spend too much time on it, but to some people, especially this judges group that wants to, that is in support of 5512, they view the Toohey case, which we view as landmark Supreme Court decision in confirmation of patient rights. They view it as something that has unintended consequences that they have to do a fix for, so they can still stay in control of people's cannabis use.
And that affects people's ability to use medicinal cannabis on parole or probation, which was just affirmed by the Michigan Supreme Court. 5512 is a bill that would eliminate that requirement for certain courts here in Michigan, including the drug court.
Yep.
It's ironic because I think people view that as judicial overreach, when in reality, 5512 would be the judicial overreach at the end of the day. And I think that nothing good is going to come of it.
In the past, judges have basically been able to tell people they cannot use their medicinal cannabis no matter what if they agree to the drug court program. We believe that it's not within their ability to do so. It violates people's civil rights. And the Supreme Court seemed to agree with us too. People v. Toohey, argued by Camoran Law. We talked a lot about that on 420 Post with Mike Brennan, who's sitting here at the table too.
And Camoran had the lawsuit to get descheduling going too, that Paul alluded to earlier. And I suggested at one point that we make this bill the Johnson-Clare Act, and that still was possible, but it's an extra step. So, and just to save the time, we didn't officially do that, but we can certainly refer to John and give him some credit and notoriety whenever we talk about this. But let's start talking about harm reduction and other things with Dr. Brad Ray. And just to let you know, by the way, welcome, Brad. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We've had Becca Newman with Becky Redham on talking about the study, how it turned to an independent group, how it's getting some really good feedback, how they are otherwise helping people, seeing how cannabis is very, very useful for many things, particularly helping people recover or get away from dangerous substances. And we've had Pamela Lynch from Harm Reduction Michigan on here. And these conversations have been awesome. They both raved about you a little bit, how you got things started at Wayne State, making that a part of your criteria to be there, to be able to look into this issue and this type of thing and to get that started. And then we discuss about how we are ultimately connected through your wife and how we're still really working on this issue, and Botanical Company is still very much in support and all that kind of stuff. So we don't have to keep it restricted to harm reduction. I know that you could have some other things of interest. We might end up going somewhere else, but really that has been a very interesting conversation for us. I know that that's something that you have experience, interest, passion, and have done research. And we would like to hear about some of that. But please introduce yourself a little bit better, and let's talk about that a little bit.
Hey, everybody. Name is Dr. Brad Ray. Just call me Brad, please. So I was in higher education for about 10 years. I've left there and just work in a private research group now, which I enjoy a lot more. I got involved in harm reduction about a little over 20 years ago. Somebody close to me overdosed on heroin and called 911, and I got to see naloxone work. If you're not familiar with what naloxone is, it's the only opioid agonist, so it can reverse an accidental opioid-related overdose. Seeing somebody I loved come back to life changed me, and I just kept asking myself for years after, like, why isn't this available everywhere? And so that just launched into learning about harm reduction, syringe services programs there in Chicago. Once I got here to Michigan and I wanted to learn about, innovative harm reduction stuff that was going on here, the cannabis donation definitely jumped out as probably one of the more innovative things. And then, I guess by and large, mostly what I study is overdose prevention and the whole overdose crisis. I'm just curious, have you guys gotten into that much in this event, in these conversations?
As it pertains to cannabis, a little bit, but not at large. If you want to get a little bit more broad into that, I'm sure we'll find that very interesting.
Yeah, sure. I think a lot of people that are, they hear overdose epidemic in the news, they know what's going on, but they don't really know what it is. And a lot of people still think people are dying of prescription opioids, and that is just not the case. People are not dying from prescription opioids. They are dying almost exclusively from fentanyl.
Yeah, Pam brought that up a little bit, but please continue.
Yeah. There is some evidence to show that fentanyl is getting mixed into other drugs. And I think that's kind of the easy path that people want to say, oh, these drug dealers are doing this is bad. But the reality is co-use of opioids and stimulants is through the roof in rates that we've never seen. And it's a lot of the same sort of drug use patterns that most Americans are engaged in, with alcohol at night and beer in the mornings, or beer at night, and coffee in the morning. But, they're just kind of ups and downs using throughout the cycle of the day. And then that really increases risk of overdose. And Pam and I are actually involved in a really interesting study now where we're looking at where police seize those drugs from. It actually increases overdose. Because I can't really say enough about sort of the volatility of fentanyl. There's almost no such thing as heroin anymore. All heroin is by and large fentanyl now, or has fentanyl in it. So what we see, and so what happens is, if you have a drug dealer you're purchasing your substances from, for a while you have a sense of what you can take, what they're selling you, how you respond to it. You develop some tolerance to that. But once that person is taken out, arrested, the drug seized, the supply runs up, you've got a matter of hours before you go into withdrawal. And so people make different decisions in that time period. They purchase from different dealers. They might mix different substances, and then that increases their risk of overdose. That's the thing, is marijuana has been shown in some other locations to be a good replacement. I think the evidence is still going to need to be there, and we need funding to do that kind of evidence, which is also pretty difficult.
So we asked this to Pam. This discussion of fentanyl being mixed with other substances has led some to include cannabis on that list. And we have never seen it. We don't understand why that would ever happen, but it gets talked about, and many people do believe it as a thing. Has it been your experience that takes place?
No. there's no evidence to show that anybody has had marijuana that's contaminated with fentanyl. Now, what there is, and I'm not a chemist, so this is not my area of expertise, but my understanding is people have tried it, but the way that fentanyl is put on there, it burns off. It burns off like if they try to sprinkle it on there and stuff like that. So it's a myth that I have heard many times, and it may one day happen. I don't know how it will happen chemically, but to date it hasn't. And when I do hear these rumors about it happening, I tend to point towards the fact that it happens in states where cannabis isn't regulated. So even I'm sure you all know this, but all the stuff that was with the vaping lung stuff a couple of years ago, they found that was almost exclusively in states where the cannabis was not regulated. So even if there is this fear of fentanyl, which the fear of fentanyl is way blown out of proportion, frankly. And I mean fear of being around it. So
Right. There's some stories of police just getting near it in a car and bad things happening or something like that. So that's.
Yeah. And I mean, we are really interested in trying to address that for a lot of different reasons. I mean, it is misinformation that's perpetuated. It increases stress amongst law enforcement, but also, they're going to be less likely to want to go into these situations if there's fear of some magical dust coming out, So yeah, I mean, I think that those myths though, and I mean, I know you all know this, you've been doing this for a long time. They go back to as far as we can remember, as far as we can see, Henry Anslinger and Reefer Madness, right? There's just always massive drug scares in our society. Fentanyl is kind of getting wrapped up into the most recent one. I will say the other thing about the whole cannabis, just donation side of things that people are using that I found pretty interesting is, drug users helping drug users is really at the center of harm reduction. That's really what it has been from the get-go. And I see, a lot of times when I see this cannabis donation, when I see this type of stuff, that's how the lens I tend to see it through is drug users helping drug users. So it seems very harm reduction focused in that way to me.
Right on. So, from your experience, I'm not sure, we were talking about this bill, and we have on the show many times, but it may not have crossed your path yet. There is an introduced bill that's been through at least a hearing and a discussion in committee so far. It's House Bill 5512, and it would allow judges, in part, we have a few issues with it, but in part it would allow judges to make a determination if somebody in that court had a condition that was, significant or severe enough with which to continue using their medical cannabis. So it does a few things. It keeps, in some ways, it infers cannabis as one of the things that should be, on the list of dangerous substances that the drug court should regularly address. Therefore, the judge should have some control over its use. The other thing is it puts the judge in the position to make a medical determination, and the judge is not a medical professional. And we think that it's not up to date because, as we were discussing right here, and what we want to get into a little bit more, is that cannabis could actually be helping a lot of people that the drug court should be. Are there? I mean, I know you're working on this study or have been working on the study that turned into the independent study that started at Wayne State. But the level of information that's already out there that people can look at, or your knowledge of an exit strategy being a viable use of cannabis.
Well, let me put the drug court thing aside for a second and talk just basically about safe supply.
Sure.
Because that's the issue here. People just don't know what they're purchasing. Our illicit drug market is totally contaminated with fentanyl, this poison. So we need a safe supply in the United States. And how we're going to get there, I don't know, especially not in the current path we're in. So in Vancouver, as an example of wanting to have safe supply of Vancouver, Canada, they actually give people meth. They actually give people heroin. They give people cocaine. And you can look this up. You can see the images of it. It's pure cocaine with a little bit of something in there to cut it. It's pure opiate, heroin with some caffeine in there. And these donations of this safe supply, they occur kitty corner to where the police department is. And so the reason the police are supportive of it, the reason that they're doing this is because people are overdosing from substances that they don't know what they are. And it's that contaminated supply that's causing that. So in the absence of being able to give regulated pharmaceutical grade substances in Michigan, I think cannabis is one potential path, one safe supply that's an alternative supply. It might not be the drug of choice that people want, but it's still regulated. We know what's in it. And if they'll use it instead of more dangerous substances, that's a win every time, in my personal opinion.
Right on.
Keeping people alive is the goal. Reducing, I mean, we are at so many overdose deaths now, y'all, and I've just been doing this so long and watching the numbers grow up. Like, you just see the apathy coming out in America too, waiting for some sort of baseline. Like, reducing these overdose deaths has got to be the goal. So that's that. Drug courts. So I was really surprised to hear that. I have not heard of this bill. In like 2013, I came to Michigan. I went to 8 different problem-solving courts, drug courts, mental health courts. I observed them at every single one of those court programs. This was in 2000, I think it was 13. People had medical marijuana cards in all of those courts, and they were functioning just fine.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm surprised that this is happening. Now, what I think it's probably, the reason it's probably happening really isn't concern about cannabis or anything like that. It's that these programs, drug courts, or any of these problem-solving court type models, they allow a team of people to sort of decide who's on their docket. So think about this from a judge for a second. Like, you get everybody coming through your docket, you have no choices, but now you're a drug court judge, so now you're just taking these types of cases. So just know, so they're able to filter out, we don't want violent folks, we don't want this. And what I've seen happen a lot in my career, the most thing that I've written about is drug courts not allowing people that have opioid use disorder in there. The gold standard treatment for opioid use disorder is methadone and buprenorphine. Those are the 2 medications that are the best for opioid use disorder. And a lot of drug courts will say, we don't want, when you leave this program, we want you to be clean of all substances. So we don't want you on those things. And so then once they realize that's the evidence-based treatment, then they'll filter that population out. So what we've seen over time is fewer people with opioid use disorder getting into drug courts because the drug courts don't want to deal with that level of evidence by having them have medications. So I'm surprised on the cannabis thing that they didn't just start to cut those people out. And I think even if this, I don't know that you all know so much more about the political process here than I do, but like, my suspicion is that even if this legislation did not go forward, judges are already going to do that. Those judges that don't want people in their court on cannabis, if they see that that person's got a card or they're licensed, then they just don't allow them into the program.
Discriminate against them.
And it already does happen. And the issue is there was in our opinion, a good ruling in the Supreme Court in the state Supreme Court about judges not being able to interfere with people using their cannabis medicine.
This might be a Supreme Court state, though. Kind of.
Yeah,
I'm surprised.
the state Supreme Court.
But I mean, that's the thing is these whole little courts, they function. So, the judges can have their kind of own little docket and they're kind of dealing with the folks on that docket. The thing with drug courts is, and this is where it gets hard too, is like there's evidence to show these things work. And, that's where the evidence was generated a while ago. It was very specific in where it was generated. And I think there always needs to be updated stuff. But drug courts are kind of facing a crisis right now too. Like, they can't keep narrowing the number of people that they're putting in there. They need to expand that.
Well, yeah. So they, you were right in their approach, and they view this ruling as having what they determine to be unintended consequences. So like they don't get to maintain the kind of control that they're used to. So it's part of this transition. It's part of this thinking. Some of the people who support it are not ill-intended. They just really lack a lot of necessary information to make a better decision.
I'll just say, like, big picture, y'all moving. So I grew up in Michigan, was moved all around the country, came back about 3 years ago, moved back here. Cannabis had just become, adult or recreational was passed or whatever. And I could not believe the level of stigma and disdain against cannabis. It really blew my mind. And I still confront it, all the time now. But, it's worth people knowing, like, even when states, and I tell this to people all the time, like, even when states legalize cannabis, these problems still don't go away, right? You all are wrestling through that right now. So,
I have concerns as a veteran with the Veterans Court. What can this legislation do to our veteran suicide rate? I mean, veterans are having a tough time enough dealing with post-traumatic stress. And for a lot of folks, the unfortunate aftermath is drug court or veteran court or some sort of legal consequence. And if we take away the only thing that's working for them, that's inhumane in my perspective. And it's just going to lead to more folks. The suicide rate's just going to keep going up. And it's a shame.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there's just so many difficulties. Detecting veterans throughout the criminal justice system is a struggle. Mm-hmm. It's just a group of folks that when arrested, the stigma is so high, the shame is so high. They don't, in the back of a car, they don't say, "Hey, officer, I'm a veteran." Mm-hmm. They don't even say at the first day of court that they're a veteran. So I think that that's like a big problem in our justice system. Like there's so many benefits that we should be routing these folks into, but identifying is part of the struggle. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm just curious, have you looked at, you were talking earlier on about the equity stuff. Have you all looked at the stuff in Evanston, Illinois, by any chance? I thought it was pretty interesting. I'll just tell you, like from my point of view, they came up, there's a New York Times article, first city council ever to support reparations. So I was like, holy crap, this is awesome. Mm-hmm. So I started to get all this information, big proponent of reparations. I don't know where everybody stands on that. And it was, it's a half of reparations where it's through purchasing property and persons of color purchase property. And then you dig into the details on how they actually got it done. And it's through cannabis. They're taking the profits from cannabis and they're helping to provide reparations using those funds. And it just got me thinking, like, how many other really innovative things are out there getting funded through cannabis dollars that we don't actually say that's how it's getting funded,
So just coincidentally, we were, all of us here, myself, Anton, and Rick, we're all part of kind of a group to think tank, if you will, to discuss with a prospective congressional candidate, from a national, from a federal perspective, some things that she should know about, cannabis and the discussions in DC and that kind of stuff. And somebody did bring up, that some of the federal taxation that we, in part of our discussion, said we got to keep low so it doesn't become prohibitive for consumers, in the states. That just the state taxing has done that alone.
Yeah.
But that, what does get collected, some of that, should be.
And on that side, Jamie, just thinking about that, in this whole cannabis donation thing, one thing that's really, I guess I shouldn't say surprised me, but I think it's worth pointing out to people is individuals with opioid use disorders, other substance use disorders that want cannabis to chip or to sort of use as a less dangerous substance. A lot of them want these high dose edibles. And when you ask why have you used high dose edibles before? Why don't you purchase these? It's price every time, right? So I think that's another reason why donation is that the fact that Michigan has that donation clause. I still haven't done like a state by state look at that, but I think that that's something that is important about the way that the policy has been set up here, that people can donate it.
So you kind of got to it, but just to be a little bit more direct, when somebody, a policymaker, is evaluating the issue of whether to apply cannabis toward remaining, a substance of issue that drug courts and others should be concerned about and be part of what they work with, or to update policy a little bit and realize that it could be a tool to actually help people recover from and move away from dangerous substances. Is there enough information out there for somebody who hasn't had the kind of experience like many of us and seen people benefit from it directly so often that they can look to that should conclude that?
And I think the issue is all of the evidence is done in very medical settings. So there are people who were already getting, opioid pain analgesic, and then they moved over to cannabis. And so there hasn't been stuff to look at this really in the real world where people are just using cannabis instead. It's usually in a very clinical setting. So I do think that, the research is, really on how effective, not whether or not it's going to increase harms. I don't think it's going to increase any harms. But, just from like a big picture standpoint, the future of this is really, I don't know. I guess I don't know how y'all feel about this. I'd be curious, but it's actually to kind of stop talking about cannabis and stop talking about heroin and stop talking about cocaine and start talking about people who use drugs.
Right. I was going to mention that too.
They're not a lesser than group in our society. They're not, they're worthy of healthcare.
We want to end the war on drugs, not just cannabis. We often are on this issue as the low hanging fruit and all that kind of stuff. So, but we should mention exactly what you're saying. And we also, I just want to mention real quick, we've been joined by Latrish in the meantime. And
kind of gotten to the tail end of it, so I was just listening and taking notes.
Very cool. I know this is the last couple of times we talked about this. You took some interest and
we are. Did you get I don't know if you got a chance to watch the committee hearing when the judge was talking about
the bill that we were talking about. Brad had a committee hearing last week.
Yeah, I spoke the testimony of it last week? I don't even know what day it is anymore.
A week ago today.
Yeah. Anyway, like, of course, like I was telling you, it's like the first time I'd done that, I felt like there's like, I was so confident too. I was there and I was like, I got this. Then I got there and it felt like there was an anvil on my chest, but I made it through it, which was kind of good. But I got my points out, I guess. And it just, to me, I feel like if there's a clarification for the situation as far as whether a medical marijuana patient should or should not be able to go through a drug court, has already been determined. It's been determined. It was determined on January 1st in 2021. And at this point, if there are some changes or some issues that need to be done, it needs to be done in communication between the judges and the system. And he kept saying that we can't ask somebody if they use medical marijuana. And I didn't understand that, and I still don't. But
there's the confidentiality clause, Section 6 of the Act, but that doesn't prevent somebody from simply asking somebody if they use medical marijuana.
If they're a state agent, though, that might.
Do you have any special things that you need to have while you're here? Are there any special things we need to know? You can ask very nonchalantly too, if that's the problem. But it's not.
The Act prohibits the information from those who don't want to disclose. There's only a few people that have access to it, and it cannot go to anybody else.
Right.
The only person that can choose to tell anybody else is the person who is the patient.
Exactly.
Just
exactly.
Usually, so they don't get into one of these programs, you usually need to sign a consent that says, I'm going to give you all this information. And if you don't want to sign it, then they say, okay, go back to jail.
Right. So, I mean, they would, but I mean, at the end of the day, when they had to start talking about like how much of a problem is this, and the judge said we probably had one.
Yeah. See, there's
no point of changing the Constitution. No. Even at this point, if just take cannabis out of it, like that movement on its own is scary to me as well. So
yeah, early on, Latrish, when I got on, I back in like 2013, I went to 8 different courts in Michigan, and mental health courts, drug courts. And, they grumbled that people were like spending their money on getting their updated medical card, things like that. But it wasn't a big deal. So it's pretty clear this is, it's politics.
They're worried about funding. And it is politics, definitely, because somebody else can make a different decision later on. But, that's just the thing, too, is that the state of Michigan actually gave more funding to these programs than actually the federal government did this time around. And they also are funded by a lot of private nonprofit federal programs as well. So there's a lot of money funneling into those courts. And after I did my numbers, because you can only go back as far as 2019 to get anything accurate between here and now, and 2021 isn't completed with the data. But based on what I had found with how many drug courts that we had, that's including mental health courts and veterans courts combined, each court system on average only get about 18 people out of their court system in a whole entire year.
Yeah.
So that's a completely different argument, completely different statement. But at this point, like I said, if that's the success rate, and I know that they were looking for, evidence of data and information, and I read a ton of documents. I went through a ton of information, probably about 40 hours I spent on just this one topic alone. And the information that they give you now, or from what I've seen so far, is not, I feel like, in my opinion, enough data for them to to specify that the program is valuable anymore at this point, at least for certain things. So the one thing the judge said when I was there that kind of had me raise my eyebrow, and it was what you were saying, is that they need to expand. So
Yeah, because even only half of the people that start these programs finish.
Right.
And so my research has been on showing how white females are significantly more likely to complete these programs than persons. But you know, the study, I think, would have been a kind of a simple one in a way. I say that knowing how long it takes to do research, but you know, do people who have a medical marijuana card or whatever have medical marijuana in problem-solving courts, are they less likely to complete the program? I mean, that's a question. And if they are, right, then there's some level for concern, but they're probably not, right? And so, like, if they're going to do this, they should at least have some evidence to show that there is some reason, like the outcomes aren't as good for this population.
100%.
Cannabis just gets shit on with no good reasoning behind it on a regular basis.
And there are people that are generationally averse to it, that you're never going to deprogram them from the war on drugs. They were soldiers in that war. In fact, the judges there were pretty much majors and captains in the war on drugs. They were certainly the gatekeepers to the prisons.
Yeah.
So
we go and do interviews with law enforcement about, like, explain to us what it's like to have wins. Like, what's it like to have a big win in this thing? And it's hard for them to even define something. You know, like, what is the big win? Like, they know it's a never ending game. And, you know, yeah, I just think it's the thing we should be focused on, is undoing that drug war. And I know that's something you all are interested in, but I don't see any other way to reduce all of these deaths, continuing to criminalize these drugs. So,
You know, and I wonder, is it a controlled substance issue? Because are we going to do the same thing to people who are taking benzodiazepines or Ambien or any of these other controlled substances? Or is it just folks who are consuming cannabis? That's the other issue. I just don't understand the why.
the pharmaceuticalization of the industry is really the key to them deciding how it's treated from here on out. If they look at this phase as just the necessary step before they got all the pharma down, and now they can pill form cannabis and give it to us, you know, intravenously, then that's just a lose as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
You know,
If I'm prescribed pharmaceutical Marinol, which is a big pharma product that, you know, with THC, is that okay because it comes from big pharma? I mean, I don't know where their angle is here on why it would be detrimental to the person's journey through drug court. It doesn't make sense.
That Marinol presents a contradiction in the view of driving too, because it'll say in the prescribed packet, you know, make sure that you know how this works with you before you drive or operate machinery or whatever, you know. But meanwhile, there's a lot of non-tolerance around the country for if cannabis, not even active, is in your system, you could get issues for driving. So, not in Michigan, fortunately, right now, but it used to be the case. It used to be a non-tolerance state, and if you just had it in your system, even if you had smoked the week before, you could.
I do, you know, that's another big thing though in this whole, you know, liberation of cannabis, if you will, is that it's not just about the substance; it is the route by which people choose to consume it. And it does have different effects, but again, we should be, you know, any route that by which people want to consume it should not be, you know, criminalized because of that particular route, you know.
Right.
we've seen lawmakers here favor medibles over smokable forms because in their mind, for whatever reason, medible is a more normalized way to take cannabis. Eating a brownie is better than rolling a blunt in their eyes. But we know that when you're looking for a fast relief from a medical situation, the respiratory system is probably the fastest way for you to get
You
that
get
thing.
everything fast when you smoke, and then some people require that.
People don't often have a choice in the route by which they consume their drugs, right? It's cultural. So if you're drinking beer or you're drinking wine, it's not because you picked that. I mean, I know we all want to think that, but it's probably because, you know, your friends were using wine or drinking wine or this particular type of beer or still are.
That's
And
what
it's
your
the
parents
same
had.
with any other drug use. You know, injection drug use it's a cultural thing. You know, people in certain parts of the country, they all inject drugs. And so people are more likely to take drugs that way. So I don't know. It's a little bit to try and push people into certain routes of taking these things, especially when the euphoric effects could be different in our pharmaceutical.
Especially when the people making decisions are not medically trained also.
So I agree with Spartan Growing here. I just wanted to point that out. And We've talked about this
Read it.
already. It says, I don't understand how a lawmaker would reason that a judge with zero medical training can overturn what a doctor recommends. And that's my opinion also, that if somebody has completed the state recognized process for becoming a medical marijuana patient, that solves the question as to whether or not they can use that medicine if they're not incarcerated.
Yeah.
And then Brandy's pointing out about Marinol here.
I heard of that Marinol.
Marinol's a C2 too. I mean, that's how did that? I don't know. I don't understand where that came in.
As controlled substance list, it's on
Yeah,
3.
just-
I think it's
Is it a 3 now?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I mean, we're and that's like Brandy pointed out. That's 100% THC. So
Synthetic THC, I think.
synthetic, exactly right. Synthetic.
Right. So as far as I'm concerned, synthetic worse than an organically derived, right?
Yeah. The conversion oil has to be labeled as synthetic,
Mm-hmm.
from what I understand.
Because of the process by which they extract THC from the CBD originating from hemp plants, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Susan Fisher, my Susan, says Marinol makes me sick. It's not for everybody. This is one of the reasons why we have such a problem with judges making these decisions. If you have 6
Whole
different
plant
substances in front of you, only one of those 6 may work. And if you're told that you cannot use that one, you're probably not going to listen to what that judge says, because your body tells you this is what it needs.
Yep. Yeah.
Human suffering isn't bound to a legal system. It isn't bound to. I mean, when people are truly suffering, they're going to do what they need to do to help get them through whatever's ailing them. And
Unfortunately, cannabis was the last thing that many people tried, but fortunately, it was around for many of those
but it was
people
the
too.
first thing that they tried that actually helped for a lot of folks. I
Yes.
know it was for me.
Al Harrington tells a story about how he named his company Viola, a very big, successful international cannabis company. His grandmother's name is Viola, and he gave her some cannabis tincture in order to take, and she was relieved in her ocular pressure and was able to read her Bible for the first time in years. And she came to him crying because cannabis was the only thing that had ever enabled her to do that. So, I mean, that's a story of healing that's wonderful for Al, but it's very common in our industry. We hear this type of stuff all the time.
Yeah, I don't know if Jamie or Becca, or I'm sorry, I don't know if Becca or Pam brought this up, Jamie, but this idea too, where the cannabis donation to folks, I was really also surprised, like talking to people who are big into harm reduction, and they would say things like, oh, I'm 100% harm reduction. I'm all about naloxone. I'm all about syringes. I'm all about all of it. And then you'd say like, well, what about cannabis? What about giving people cannabis as part of a safe supply? And they would go, I don't know. We don't know yet what the properties are. We don't know yet if they do this.
I know.
And so it is like one of these things where harm reduction by its very nature is people out there doing things to help each other. And I think people just embrace the tools after they have all of this evidence behind them. And this one is going to be particularly hard to embrace because we're not going to get federal funding anytime soon to determine the evidence.
Well, and that's one of the things we've seen in Michigan, laws that allow doctors to use evidence-based medicine or evidence-based techniques in order to treat their patients with things that are available commercially before the Food and Drug Administration says they're available, federally. And cannabis, I can't imagine a single substance on the face of the earth that has more human experience where we have evidence-based
Certainly that it doesn't cause a problem.
Sure.
That's for
Millennial.
sure. Worth
Millennial.
using, worth trying. That's for sure.
If we have millions of users here in Michigan, and each one of them has used cannabis thousands of times for most of us. That means millions and billions of uses of cannabis. And you count the number of times that we've ever seen something on the news on one hand, and most of those were just overproduced commercial programs on traditional media that was just trying to be clickbait headline grabbing.
But no death, right? No 5,000 recorded years of history, no deaths for cannabis ever, right?
Well, what about aspergillus in California? There was one death associated with aspergillus.
But I would bet that if we all looked at whatever data existed, that we could not find a any causation that could be concluded across the board. That's the problem. A lot of this information gets repackaged as if it's causal and it's just correlative, And,
Totally. Like I see it all the time where people will be like, oh, the meth was, the cannabis had fentanyl in it. How did you know that? Oh, from the post-mortem toxicology results. So somebody has died and you see THC and fentanyl in their system and you're just making an assumption there.
right.
Well, and that's the only reason they make that assumption is because it advances their pre-existing notion that cannabis is bad. So they're trying to attach it to a substance everybody knows is bad in order to reinforce cannabis's badness.
It's also turned out in some of these stories that some people have reported that all they did was use cannabis. They did use other things, but they didn't want to admit it. So they said all they did use was cannabis. So that's the association took place that way.
Trying to escape consequences.
Yeah.
Can't blame them for that. Look
Yeah.
at how terrible it is when people get consequences for cannabis use. So,
The stigma of drug use is killing so many people. It's depressing, frankly. So.
absolutely true. Absolutely true. And again, for an industry that has made so many billions of dollars in just even a single state here in Michigan, for us to still have to struggle with some of the basics, to educate our municipal leaders. Every time we go to them and they put forth one of these crazy ordinances that says caregivers are terrible for our community, so we have to limit them to just a couple of plants or just a small number of square feet in their house, and only if they have an associated amount of acreage. It's frustrating, but it seems like we should be further along on a general education about cannabis than we are right now.
Biggest problem I ran into with that, Rick, actually, we just went to Arbella last night again. This is the second meeting, and I think we've got them convinced to drop their attorney. But we did have some pretty honest conversations with some of the council members, and they actually learned a lot. It was kind of neat. They went and watched our videos, and they actually watched some videos of Rick and Jamie too as well. And they were generally more concerned right now about the mass grows at home, like the home grows. There's some of these people that are buying these houses right now, like $30,000-$40,000 over the asking price, because it's already set up as far as the amperage, the acreage, and all that other good stuff too. So, I don't really know how to combat that situation or have that conversation. So it is something that I'm going to start digging a little bit more deeper into, as far as it may probably just be something a little bit more simple and not as complex. But that is one of the major reasons why they are willing to create so many, I guess, ordinances on a certain scale, like permits and whatnot. So I feel like if we were able to start figuring out how to combat that issue, we might see a lot less of these issues happen.
I would really hope that that's true, that, having some evidence to show them would actually stop them from being idiots. But my experience tells me that idiocy goes bone marrow deep. So
It does. You're true. It's true.
So we've just been joined by Jim Salame. And so, Brad, Jim's done a lot of work on an organization, with an organization called Decriminalize Nature. Point being to decriminalize or make legal entheogenic plants and other substances. I guess they don't like to use the word psychedelic, but just so you know what I'm talking about, psychedelic substances. And have you crossed over into looking at that kind of stuff in the same way as cannabis for harm reduction? And
I haven't, no. I have read some of the research on the PTSD. I'm curious, what's the reluctance on psychedelics? Is that I don't know the reason behind that change in nomenclature.
It's like saying weed. It's like saying pot. We would like to say cannabis when it comes to cannabis. And same goes for psychedelic, just conjures up like the 60s. And we're trying to get rid of some of the stigmas that it can attach itself to.
So what's the preferred nomenclature, as the dude would say from Big Lebowski?
I like it. Plant medicines.
Plant medicines, okay.
entheogens.
Entheogens, yeah.
Entheogens, huh.
It's actually entheogen, but yeah, entheogen is another
Entheogen, okay. Like people say CBDs incorrectly all the time, and similar to that. I appreciate you clarifying that and pointing out my mistake.
good video.
It's rare when I make one, so it's good to take a minute to be humble about it.
Yeah.
No, I have not looked into donating that or anything like that. I mean, I've heard of other places doing it though. So what's your specific research or advocacy in that, Jim?
I was on the board for Decrim Nature, Ann Arbor, and we helped pass the resolution in Ann Arbor that decriminalized plant medicines and fungi in the city. And then our county prosecutor came out and made it his own entheogen policy in the whole county. So now we're working on, there's a group called MICH, M-I-C-H, that is working on getting a ballot initiative together. And we're starting to raise a lot of money to get the ballots signed and collect signatures to get it on the ballot in November.
Do you I'm sorry, I'm just curious, but like, so I know it's Ellie Savitt, right? The prosecutor there?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. So like, has anybody looked to see, like, has there been an impact in reduced incarcerations or arrests or even harassment by law enforcement around plants?
That's a great question. I don't know that answer. You know, it's kind of strange. You can go in Ann Arbor now and they've got things posted on posts around the city for call this number if you want mushrooms delivered to you. So there's definitely something going on. I haven't heard of anyone getting incarcerated for that. And you'd think that would be something maybe law enforcement would follow, but
well, Ellie and Victoria said basically unless there's a victim attached, they don't really want to have to deal with it. And Victoria's like an associate prosecutor who's also very cool and has a great philosophy that many of us appreciate.
I mean, and this is something to talk further about maybe sometime, but like we have something going where we're looking at a state or a city where the prosecutor, similarly progressive prosecutor, said we're done prosecuting small amounts of cannabis. So then we started to look what happened to police behavior. And sure enough, police did stop arresting people on small and incarcerating people on small amounts of cannabis, but their large amounts of cannabis doubled. So sometimes when law enforcement are not on the same page with prosecutors, the punishment can just inadvertently shift. So I think it's something to just keep an eye on as those policies unfold in Ann Arbor and Washington.
You know, law enforcement, at the end of the day, law enforcement's about statistics, right? I mean, if you have a prosecutor who's not willing to prosecute these cases, you've wasted all your manpower, all your resources, and really that's the only way they're going to learn. And that's the only way that these issues are going to get laid to rest, because unless, you know, the cops, there's got to be something in it for them. You know, statistics lead to budgets lead to, you know, their existence. So.
Hey, Jim, Susan's asking if you know of a relationship between psilocybin or another substance in that world and cancer treatment, similar to, you know, I guess the oils in cannabis.
I don't think anything compares to what RSO oil can do to cancer cells. I know that they're using psilocybin in some cases. Some of the states, even the more conservative states like Iowa and Missouri, have come out with laws that will allow people to use at end of life psilocybin to help them with their oncoming passing. And that's something that I'm familiar with, but I haven't heard anything about it in any regard of using it to keep cancer at bay. Right. But I wouldn't be surprised if it would allow for something like that, because mushrooms have a lot of good immunity qualities as well. And they can really help turn things around in your body, whether it be, you know, chaga or reishi or, you know, some of the other ones out, lion's mane, that are really helpful for the immune system.
Certainly these psychological conditions, though, there's definitely enough there to show some promise of PTSD and depression. I mean, they people describe, or the studies.
Mental reset.
Yeah, the resetting of the brain, or kind of from using it. And
For me, ayahuasca, I'll say I went to Peru and I had done ayahuasca and I had done San Pedro, but from a pain perspective, I would say, and I've used psilocybin for my fibromyalgia pain as well. So I have gotten pain relief, to kind of answer Susan's question. But ayahuasca for me was the one thing that mentally just reset me. I was a new person. So I do think there's a lot of, especially in veterans with PTSD or anyone with PTSD, there's these medicines have capabilities that I don't think we've even begun to realize.
They help break addictions.
Yeah. I look at iboga. Iboga is a leading in that space is for addiction, for opiate addiction. People are using these medicines, and yeah, their substance abuse issues are ceasing. Yeah, they're gone.
Is that a better word, Brad, or better terminology to use, substance abuse as opposed to addiction? I've heard something like that.
Yeah, I tend to just say people who use drugs. Yeah, that's kind of my.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
in small. I'm sorry, Brad.
Oh, I was just going to say most people who use drugs continue using them because they have a good time, not because they're addicted. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And small doses of psilocybin are helping people on a micro level to get over their PTSD, to help their depression. And this is something that, you take it in a very small dose, and it's so small that you don't feel that psychedelic feeling that you'd get if you took a larger dose. And it's almost like something Spartan Grown just said, and, go green, Spartan Grown. It helps with, that daily like lift up. I forget what he had said.
Brought that table in. We just had huge.
Yes.
And of course, anytime you affect the brain, anytime you improve your brain chemistry, your attitude, improve your outlook on life, then it has a corresponding positive benefit to your internal health. But as far as affecting the growth of tumors or restricting the advancement of cancer, and of course, Susan asking the question is a well-known cannabis advocate here in Michigan in the late stages of cancer. I'm not sure that we have any research on those particular substances.
I can speak anecdotally and just like think about this in a way that, what we feed our minds and what we feed ourselves can sometimes bring on illness. Like past traumas and things can cause illness in our bodies. And if we can deal with that anxiety, that depression, or that trauma, then we can keep ourselves healthy and maybe even correct some things. So, I can see eventually finding that mushrooms do help in that regard, because it is all psychosomatic. I believe that we can change our body's chemistry if we believe strongly enough and we have the right tools to do it.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen that kind of stuff, Brad, with some of the research?
I haven't. I just have not looked into it personally.
Okay. Because, whether there was a response noticed with placebos or something like that along the lines where people just willed themselves into a better situation, even though there was no substance that necessarily was driving that.
I don't know. I have seen those videos that you were talking about, the end of life stuff, though, which are just so powerful to watch. People taking, I think it was psilocybin towards the end of their life, and kind of the brain reset that you were describing.
Yeah, when we talk about the world of psilocybins, psychedelics, whatever you want to call them, entheogenic substances, it's just a really broad subject field. You've got, buttons, you've got cacti, you've got, ayahuasca.
People lick frogs. Yeah.
There's just a variety of it. So when we start talking about, trying to capitalize on some of the effects that they have, wow, that's just a whole realm to be able to experience and explore. And I think it's almost disingenuous to try and speak about it in a single voice, because clearly you're not describing some of peyote's effects when you're describing the effects of ayahuasca. It's two different substances.
Yeah, totally different. But this discussion gets teed up, though. We talked about this last year at the Entheo Fest.
Right.
Yeah.
That the cannabis issue coming before it is helping to pave the way a little bit for people to be more open to some of the discussions and that it works, and that with less stigma and less hassles to get to the point where we can actually talk about it, how it works and stuff like that.
I'd like it with the government bought you an end of life frog, where you're in hospice and you just lick all day long, and then it makes your passing.
Blue Kiss Gardens, the line was drawn by my incorrect statement.
The frog erotica. Okay. Wow, I missed that reference, and I'm glad I did. But yeah, no, end of life frog. I think we should all sign up for one of those.
Yeah. There's a lot of different things out there. And I guess everyone is going to react differently off them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just like cannabis. So the good thing is that these are natural medicines when it comes to plant medicines and fungi. So the toxicity is nil.
So people say that it's one of the few things that you could actually call safer than cannabis, at least in terms of the mushrooms, right?
I haven't heard that. I can't.
You have not heard that? Okay.
No.
It is now being heard.
I have heard it, and I assumed since your extensive background and experience with it, you would have come across it. So now that makes me question whether or not I actually heard it.
Well, again, you're talking about two substances where it's literally impossible to overdose, right? You can have too much, but for a consequential overdose where you're crippled afterwards or you're significantly impaired,
You don't get over toxic and die.
a couple days later, you're back to norm. I mean, Dr. Brad, I don't want to overspeak there.
Oh, no, that's true. I will just say, I was thinking about this exercise I used to do when I taught classes, where I'd give students these like 8 real drugs with facts about each of these 8 drugs, but I would just say, these are made up hypothetical drugs. I just made this information up. And I'd ask them to criminalize them. How much would you criminalize this? Would you make it totally available for everybody, or a felony if somebody had it? And it's amazing to see when you just give people the scientific information and you don't give the label. They're totally different, right? Heroin,
That's interesting.
aspirin, alcohol, then they'll start saying maybe we should arrest people for that. And so like you're saying, though, the thing that triggers a lot of students in their criminality of it is, what's the risk of overdose and death? And if there's nil risk there, then they're less likely to make that punitive, you know?
And that really just goes to show the destructive and nature of the punishments that were assigned to some of these substances during the war on drugs. You're really looking at some of the worst sentences ever delivered by American judicial system for cannabis trafficking or for cannabis use or possession or cultivation. So there's just no equality between the effect that the substance has and the way that we've treated it within our system.
Have any of you heard of a clinic in Ann Arbor that does guided trips with mushrooms? So there was I remember there was a DMT opportunity at one point that was in Ann Arbor, and it was kind of a guided scenario. And there are people that are therapists who have a component to their practice that are able to help people through those things and get some therapeutic benefit out of those.
Michigan Psychedelic Society might be a good place to look. Jim Salame, you'd know better. Might be a good place to reach out, to contact them, and maybe
Definitely would be. You're right, Rick. And there are places in Ann Arbor that are helping. That's part of the resolution. The resolution allows for therapeutic use of this. And that's also part of the statewide bill that was introduced by Jeff Irwin and Holyer from Detroit last September. It's also part of this ballot initiative to have therapists be able to assist people with these medicines. And that's pretty much it when it comes to making it an economic impact, because they're not looking to corporatize it and allow for large sales or large grows of mushrooms. But I've heard of places all around Ann Arbor that are growing mushrooms. I'm not privy to who they are. Like I said, you can see on some of the light posts, some of the advertisements on it. But there are places that for people that are looking for serious therapeutic help, who want a guided tour, that are available. And again, Rick, you pointed out, go to, the Michigan Psychedelic Society. It's mipsychedelicsociety.com, and join up and go to one of the meetings, and you'll probably find some answers.
Another interesting thing is, as long as we hold off on legalization, people will find loopholes. A big thing right now is I don't know if folks have heard of research chemicals, which is where, they take a 5-MeO DMT, they'll add a hydrogen, and it's not that substance anymore, and they sell it on the internet.
But it works very similar.
But it works very similar. But they're not regulated, and we don't know where they come from. And we could take it and have a very natural product that could be legal, and to kind of cut those loopholes off, because people will always find a way to get these substances out on the market, whether it's a slight, and we don't know how it reacts in the body, whether they add something or take something away. And that's kind of, look at bath salts and all these other crazy substances that have kind of flooded the market and are actually harming people. There's no reason for it.
People chase things. They chase the best high. They chase the best high. They chase the highest THC number. There's just all different ways in which folks are seeking the next greatest experience, and they're willing to potentially sacrifice your health.
And people do it with cars though too, right? People drive cars super fast. They drive cars super wild. But what do we do with cars? We put seatbelts in them. My car.
Rich guys go to space. Rich guys go to space.
So, I mean, that's the thing. Like what you just said is at the core of harm reduction. People are not going to stop using drugs. Drugs have been used throughout all of human history. Every single society and culture have used them. They're not going to stop. So, like, let's stop shifting our conversation from how to stop and let's start figuring out how to make them safer. I think that's really the goal of what we should be doing as we end this drug war, you know.
I agree, doctor. And what we need to do to make it safer is just by educating people. You know, that's what I think we missed the boat on that a little bit with cannabis, and we got that back halfway through, you know, the last decade or so. I think Washtenaw County's got something on their website now for people to go and learn about cannabis. We need that more for the plant medicines and the fungi as these become more available and more mainstream. Because you don't want to confuse cannabis and mushrooms. They're two different things, and you can take a lot of cannabis and not feel the things that you'll feel if you take a lot of mushrooms. And a lot of mushrooms, you need somebody with you. A lot of cannabis, you end up just going to bed. But it's really important to definitely do your research.
If you have somebody with you when you smoke a lot of cannabis, you just smoke twice as much cannabis. It's not necessarily a benefit like having a guide. You know, when you're doing a heavy trip, a hero's dose, for example, that's a terminology that's used for an exceptionally
I think it's like a 5 gram kind of.
Yeah, Terrence McKenna started that. It's a 5 gram dose.
Yeah, and
I'm a 0.5 guy.
Yes.
Educating people too how these things work together, because you know, cannabis and mushrooms together, I've had a very unpleasant experience with combining the two, and I just didn't know, right? Live and learn.
Yeah.
But it's educating folks on how some of these things can play nice together or how they may not, and that's going to prevent these horrible experiences from happening, and allowing people to kind of open up to the medicine and allowing it to work instead of just saying, I'm never touching that stuff again. You know, it's like kind of like with the edibles. You take an edible once and you're not prepared for it. Some people may not.
They don't go back, even though it could be a good thing for them, right?
Exactly. They don't go back, right?
I will tell you that having had a variety of different entheogens, including LSD, when you consume alcohol on LSD, you cannot feel your impairment. You cannot feel your intoxication. So when the LSD wears off, you are now completely polluted with alcohol poisoning because you just were unaware. And if you knew that going in,
it's okay.
And if you knew that going in, then you would definitely not do that, or you'd have the people around you advise you to not do that. But without that knowledge, you could really make a critical mistake, and then it would be wrongly assumed that it was the entheogenic substance that was the culprit.
And Brad, you're right. There's some kind of an acceptance or just understanding of people that just want to do different things and have some fun with different things without the ridiculous lifelong consequences or stigmas or all that kind of stuff attached. So in terms of the study that you helped to get started while at Wayne State, can you talk about early returns on information on that and where that's headed? And if that turns, let's say, one day that is completely written up, the IRB is, approved everything. It's conclusive. Is that one more thing amidst a list of research that points to this, cannabis being a very useful tool for harm reduction, or would that be somewhat revolutionary? Would really start showing a story?
No, I wish I could sit there and say it would be revolutionary, just because keep in mind, we got books, we got many articles that show buprenorphine is effective. For example, for opioid use disorder, we still got a lot of medical doctors and judges that don't want to prescribe buprenorphine. So evidence isn't the only thing that's going to get us there. But what I think that project, getting kind of it off the ground, it shows the feasibility of this donation. One, that it can be done in Michigan, that people can donate cannabis, but also two, that there's a big desire, both amongst caregivers and amongst these, smaller companies. So I think just showing that it can be done and showing that it is being done is really where we're at with it. Getting at the effectiveness of it, I think that's going to take a lot more time, money, research, people. I think the main thing that should be done now is starting to compile the stories of people that have had these successes and starting to just sort of generate those stories, show how frequently they're happening, the different ways that they're happening. So yeah, I think that's where it's at. And I think where we'll end up going with it next is looking at some of that donation data that's coming from the store, and really seeing, what types of products do people want to manage their, use disorder. So.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. That's a botanical company he's talking about. And we're trying to get some others to come on board to help expand the studies. But in the meantime, as you said, we know it works. There's been a lot of positive response to it, and people have donated and people have gotten medicine to people outside of the study just because we facilitated it, and people are now better off because of it. And take a minute again to really appreciate all those people involved in that process, donating, preparing stuff, getting it to people. It's awesome. That's what it's all about. We have some well-known people, Darren McCarty for one, who has a testimonial. It's very similar how cannabis has helped with many issues that he's gotten. Being a professional athlete, prescribed a lot of pain pills, drinking a lot. He's gone down some bad roads.
I mean, Aunt Gwen Jameson has a great story about getting off pharmaceutical medicines for her multiple sclerosis, which is a separate issue. But when we start talking about all these different success stories, it's kind of hard to ignore the commonality there, which is the connection to the herb or the connection to psychedelic substances.
Yeah, she actually heard in her story, in her testimonial, she was upset when she realized the simple plant takes the place of all these expensive drugs, and it's like, what the hell are they making me do here?
Yes.
Yeah. For me, I would say one of the best decisions I made in my life was skipping the Suboxone appointment at the VA. I was prescribed high amounts of opiates.
You didn't like it?
I you know what? I didn't like the idea of still having an opiate in my system. So I never showed up. They wanted me to go into withdrawal and then show up and take the medicine. And I just cold turkeyed it. And it was miserable, but I appreciate that I made that decision because I didn't want to be a slave to another substance. And, some people can do it and some people cannot. They need to be assisted by those medications, and that's okay. But for me personally, I'm glad I never went down that road.
I mean, I will say this though, too, on those medications, like had you gone down that road, what do you got to do? You got to show up there all the time.
Yep. Yes.
You got to maybe get enough to take home for a weekend sometimes. So, and what happens if you take it with another substance?
Yeah.
Right? So it's, again, the buprenorphine may or may not have been the issue, or is it the structures, the system that we put around the ability to get that is a pain in the ass.
Yep. Now you're owned too. These doctors own you. If you step out of line, you have cannabis in your system. We're taking that medicine away. Now you're going to suffer. It's just another control mechanism that I just didn't feel like I needed, but it does help some folks. So I mean, it does.
Well, with the modern regulations that we have, especially regarding opioids and things like that, they don't. Adam Brook has complained about that on this program before. They don't give you a decent amount of supply. You have a very small window. They give you a 30-day, and if you happen to be out of the country or if you happen to be someplace else or you're not capable of getting there within that 30 days, there could be a gap in your supply. And that really affects so many different aspects of your health.
And there's people that drive hours every morning, 4:00 in the morning to get methadone.
Yep.
Because they can only get it through, regulated centers. There is a big movement out there. It's called low threshold buprenorphine. Hopefully it takes up more in Michigan, I think, over time. But it is just saying, just take the medicine. If you take it with other stuff, if you don't show up to meetings, I'm not going to cut you off. But just here's the medicine, and I'm not a fan of the assisted part. I think that the evidence is starting to show the medicine is what's most effective, not the assisted treatment. So
right, yeah. I think it's possible to do monitoring without having an attendant population too, without having people that are required to show up. Oftentimes, people that need some of these medicines the most are those least capable of hitting a regular schedule.
Exactly.
I sometimes with my migraines, there's just impossible for me to get out for 3 days. And if I have to cancel appointments, I have to cancel appointments. And sometimes physicians look at that as if you're not serious about the program, when in reality, it's just a physical limitation that you have to deal with.
Yep. In France, they just flooded the market with buprenorphine in the early 2000s. Every general practitioner could prescribe it. So just like antibiotics in the US, you could get it from any single pharmacy, and overdose deaths dropped by 70%. So getting these types of alternative therapies out there widely can work.
One of the things Pam said when she was on our program that was the most significant was talking about Narcan vending machines and being able to put Narcan vending machines around goodness gracious, what a wonderful thing that would be.
Yeah, well, we're doing it, Rick. I got to tell you this though too. So we've done this in like a bunch of jail facilities. There's a couple of vending machines that are out there in the public and treatment facilities. I've been talking to people from Canada about this, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we don't charge." So the vending machines we've created, it's free naloxone. You just walk up and hit a button, and naloxone comes out. But I talked to people from Canada, and they're like, "Oh, we're actually putting safe supply in there in rural areas." So you can just go to, and you have to go to a doctor and you can use your hand to scan it, this biometric scanner thing, and you can get safe supply from a vending machine. So the appeal of the vending machine too is we have put way too much stigma around naloxone, getting naloxone. People don't want to have to go see a pharmacist or a doctor or sit through 30-minute training. They just want the stuff. And I think just making it available with fewer barriers is kind of the
I agree.
win.
That makes a lot of sense.
My hope is that the cannabis companies will start putting those types of vending machines in too, though, sometime, because again, drug users helping drug users. I mean, that's the core of harm reduction.
Of course, we don't consider cannabis really a drug. We consider it an herbal supplement, So, but yes, the point is still the same. Most of us have on this show had admitted that we use more than just cannabis, actually. A lot of entheogenic topics discussed today. So.
I can't think of any Americans I know that don't use drugs. So.
Or would you want to know any?
Yeah. We're boring people. Because we don't live in Washington, D.C., that's why. So that's probably the place where
Most drugs are probably used in that place.
you would so. Yeah.
I don't know if you were about ready to say something else.
Nope, go ahead.
I don't know if we're going to be joined by Representative Rabhi today or not. So I'll bring up, hopefully I haven't double checked, but today there was supposed to be the introduction of a bill to take cannabis off the state's controlled substances list, where it, even in spite of legalizing for medical and for adult use, it remains and still causes, a lot of problems for people. And I really hope that happened. I hope we have a bill number soon. I think we're going to hear from a lot of the advocacy groups who are in support, and from Robbie's office, and get anything. But hopefully that helps out as well with everything that we're discussing. It keeps people in legal jeopardy for using or dealing with small amounts of cannabis in certain activities. That's not necessarily covered directly or in somebody's interpretation with the existing like adult use law or something like that. And then therefore it reverts back to the criminal code where it's connected to cannabis by the controlled substances list, and there are felonies and all that kind of stuff, associated with that on that level. And it's in the health code. And as Rick started alluding in the beginning of the show, it's still an issue for people having to deal with child protective services, with getting their driver's license, with professional licensing at large. And hopefully it helps to keep people out of jail and helps to destigmatize, some of the stuff that we're talking about. It's not, if it passes, it's got a tough road, but it's at least getting introduced.
But as cannabis succeeds, so do all other drugs succeed too, right? All other substances, because when we see people who grew up thinking of cannabis in one particular really negative light, now having an epiphany, kind of coming full circle over into the accepting of cannabis as being a positive influence in their life, they start to challenge some of the other lies they were told about some of the other things too. You just described earlier, Brad, your students, when given a choice, thought heroin would be an across the counter kind of a medicine because of the different benefits that it offers the human body. But if you were to ask the average person straight up, should heroin just be at CVS? You know what they'd say. No.
And he also said in reverse, people would look at something that's like aspirin or something and think that maybe there should be criminality associated with it. So, yeah.
I mean, the funny thing is, though, with pharmacies like opiates, heroin is the same chemical compound as Oxycontin, hydromorphone, all that stuff. So really, a lot of these pharmacies already do have heroin. It's just a safer supply.
And those are the real gateway drugs. People realize after a while that heroin is cheaper and easier to get than prescription drugs, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan of that term gateway drug, I will just say. I don't think...
Right, okay. I agree with that. I was kind of making fun of the way that it gets used for cannabis quite a bit and just saying it actually has an application, at least in this situation. But you're right. It shouldn't be referred to.
We should just eliminate that from the lexicon, right?
Well, I mean, if we could prove it, I'd be all about it, but I have not seen any evidence that one.
Right on. Good point.
I think what we can do to benefit the whole movement for plant medicines is to refer to them as plant medicines. If it's a plant and it's not been, tinkered with and scientifically, changed into something like heroin or cotton or something, then it's a plant medicine. I mean, peppermint's a plant medicine. Cannabis is a plant medicine.
Morphine would be a plant medicine then, and heroin. I mean, they're derived from a poppy plant.
Derived, exactly
But
derived.
if you use the poppy plant for something, that's what he means. Like if you didn't process anything out of it,
Just using the milk directly from the poppies. Yeah, right.
I think that's important for cannabis more than anything, is to refer to cannabis as a plant medicine, because it is just that.
Well, in Latin America, coca plants used, they just chew it, put it right between the cheek and gum all day long. So when you talk about that use as opposed to refining it down into a powdered form, then there is a difference in my mind, at least, between those two. Even though they're both derived from the same thing, they're certainly not the same substance.
And you bring up a good point too, Brad, or at least allude to when you say you haven't seen any evidence of the gateway scenario. There are many things within the cannabis world that can be applied to, where people have internalized things about it that there's no really good reason to believe in the first place. So that's part of this whole process, this whole issue of even getting somewhere reasonable.
The reason that there's this whole gateway drug thing, just so y'all know, is people look at the evidence backwards. So you go to a clinic, you talk to some people that are using heroin, you ask them, have you used alcohol? Have you used cannabis? Have you used cocaine? Have you used this? And they say, yes, 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 yes. But if you were to just ask everybody who used cannabis, how many of you went on to use heroin, it would be super duper small. It would be a ridiculously small percentage, So it's just, we're looking at the evidence the wrong way, and that's how they come up with this gateway stuff.
And how much of that is convenient for physicians to describe addiction in that way? And how much of that is dictated by law enforcement advantage?
I think it's a lot of the medical industry, medical folks wanting to say like one thing caused this other, when it's things like childhood trauma. It's things like that's what's PTSD. That's what's causing people to try different substances.
And Spartan just back there a second ago just said that it's the gateway back out to be real, and it is. We call it exit strategy instead of a gateway strategy quite often, and that is a lot more appropriate, probably.
Yeah.
I prefer herons instead of heroines, because I like birds. Birds are good. Just take the eye out of it, right? So, but we're here with Mike Brendan from 420 Post and Anton Harb, the Hero Project, Jamie from Americans for Safe Access, myself from Michigan Normal. We just have so many different organizations here that are clued in to the issues that we're talking about here today. And this is how you increase awareness, is by making people who have a big audience aware of what's going on, and then get them to talk about your message. Brad, if there was one thing that we should carry forth from today, from the conversation that we've had today, what would you like us to be able to share with our audience going forward?
Oh, geez, I don't know, man. That's a tough one.
I always do that to people because it's a tough one.
By the way, real quick, Adam is here, but he's in the area of the event where he could smoke, so he's not participating in this show.
Thanks, Adam. Sorry.
Go ahead, Brad. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. I guess it would just be to kind of, and I know the term drug is not something y'all like. I guess I think of caffeine as a drug. I think of aspirin as a drug.
No, and there's usage, and it doesn't have to necessarily be horribly negative or something like that. So we got you.
Yeah. And so I just think, embracing fellow drug users and supporting their decisions and focusing on keeping people alive rather than getting them to conform to the behaviors that you want them to, I think should be the goal during an overdose epidemic of unprecedented proportions that's getting worse. So focus on life, not punishment, would be my main.
One thing we know about the war on drugs, you can't wag your finger at people and get them to stop doing things that they really enjoy doing. You can't. So it's better to craft policy that takes that into account, that works with people and their actual behavior patterns, and trying to get them to conform to some my way or the highway kind of a.
Well, your highway pun is noted here that, before it used to be the biggest cause of accidental death in the U.S. was car accidents.
Right.
And what did we do? We made cars safer. The current number one cause of accidental death in America is drugs. So we need to focus on making drugs safer.
I thought it was Joe Rogan. Thank you for correcting me that. All right, it switches all the time. It's never sure what the statistics are showing lately, but the fact is, we've got a lot of people here at the Causeway Bay have come here today for the Sensi Magazine event. The industry is growing hugely. There's billions of dollars involved now. There are a lot of people that don't make a connection between cannabis, the cannabis industry, and other recreational substances. It's really false to try and separate cannabis from all of the other substances that we as human beings enjoy to use, right? Looking for you, Brad, to fill in the gap there. Yes.
Yes. Sorry.
That was called the setup.
He was thinking, wow, Rick really is insane. I'm not sure how I don't want to be connected to this really.
He forced me to answer, Brad. He forced me to answer. No, but it's a wonderful time to be in the cannabis industry, but it may not necessarily be so great if you're someone addicted to opioids, because you don't get the support system in the United States of America that some other nations offer.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Jamie's denying Anton the ability to be on camera here because
too much exposure.
I know. Share it with Mike. Let Mike get on camera.
Too much attention being given to
There
Anton.
we go. Yes. So, and again, just throwing together a show today here at Causeway Bay that we're in the middle of setting up all the different displays and things too. I don't know. She said like a ridiculous amount of vendors here, 60 something like that.
The room out there is
Actually,
packed.
100.
It's 100
It's
vendors.
packed. The room out there is
And
packed.
How late is it going to?
1,000 people. She
It's going till
sold
10
out-
o'clock,
She
I
sold
think.
out all 500 VIP tickets.
Nice.
So the crowd's going to start to come soon.
And we are in the VIP lounge, so I expect 490.
Rick, you don't have a name.
I'm going to be
on-
hanging out where Adam is before too long. I think
Yeah.
that's the place to be probably.
Rick, you don't have a name. Are you the Rick Simpson?
I am not Rick Simpson. Thank you very much for thinking that I could be that guy. No, I'm Rick Thompson. So
Okay.
just
You can
lonely
call
old
me
Rick
Rick
Thompson.
Simpson.
But I'll tell you this:
Anybody.
he used to work with a guy also named Rick, and his nickname was Big Daddy. And sometimes people would confuse Rick with Big Daddy, and that caused some
So I'm large.
some
daddy.
hilarity.
I'm not big daddy.
at times.
Large
I mean, that's
daddy.
the way.
Big daddy, large daddy.
Big Daddy was pretty
Nobody
big.
knows outside of Michigan
Yeah,
about
with great
RSO
diameter.
stuff.
Yes, that's exactly.
Gentle there, yeah.
No, so it's been a crazy ride here in Michigan, and that's one of the things we
Rick-
want to do.
Rick is in Croatia, actually. Rick Simpson is in Croatia right now. He's
Really?
he's got to stay away from Canada, where he would get arrested if he went back there. He's been to many places, and he's ill, and
And
he's
he's
using
wanted
his.
in many of them, right?
Well, he actually is. Yes, because he gives away cannabis products for free and teaches his craft to just about anybody that'll sit down and listen to him.
Phoenix
Oftentimes-
Tears is the name of the site.
Yep,
People want to check it out.
oftentimes he does run afoul of local law enforcement because they frown on sharing information about stuff they've been doing wrong for the years.
And he's really exiled overseas. That's true.
Yeah, he's been in Europe, and he went to Europe when they raided. Well, I don't know the whole story perfectly. There is information out there to check it out. But when he was out of the country, they decided that the issue they had for a long time with them is that he would just give it away, and the law was selling it. The illegality was selling it. So that's why in some places, and in Michigan, it wasn't illegal even at the point when medical cannabis was passed. It wasn't illegal to sell it. It was just illegal to transfer it.
I think that guy's a lot older than me too.
The prosecutors just didn't.
I'm sorry.
Not much.
I mean, I use the magic shampoo, so it's hard to tell. But yeah, I'm
I mean, the prosecutors didn't have to prove a sale. They just wanted to prove that it went from one hands to another. That's right.
Yes.
But in Canada, it wasn't like that, so they had to figure that out for a while.
Outside of Michigan, nobody even knows what RSO is. That's been my general experience. So
Oh, that's a
Well, you know what?
Wow.
What it is hash oil, and that's what it was before Rick Simpson was involved in it. So he might be known as that. But
And Susan Fisher's calling attention to Uncle Pete, who's a
Yeah.
cannabis legend here in
he
Michigan.
teaches people how to make this and
Rick Simpson
properly and stuff like
and
that
has
too.
donated gallons over the years to worthy people to save their lives, and in many cases it's been successful. Yep. Brian Barger wants to add ice cream to the list. I don't
I'm
know
not sure
what
which
but
list we were talking
every
about.
list can be enhanced by ice cream.
Yes.
Probably the most substance abusing potential
Oh yeah.
thing.
Sugar's a real dangerous one, y'all.
Yeah.
Adam Brooks said sugar is the real gateway drug. He said it from his stony perch in that other place that we're not at right now. But yes, he
The
certainly
original.
and that's really, we talk about gateway drugs and we talk about defining drugs in different ways. sugar is a real problem in our community, in our society. We can't give the food that we eat to other nations as donations because they're not used to the way that we eat things. Our calorie content is just so high. If you were to take a McDonald's hamburger and give it to someone from an impoverished nation, that would really mess their system up. So we treat our bodies way different here in the United States than other people do. Whether that's a privilege and a benefit or whether that's to our detriment, I couldn't say. But
A lot of it's ignorance.
What's that, Jim?
A lot of it's ignorance, and people just not knowing and just going for whatever's easy and fast. And not
By the
realizing
way, we may get Rep. Robbie just for a minute or two at the end of the show. It's possible, but he did let me know that the bill was not dropped today just because there wasn't somebody at the Services Bureau when he went down there to submit it. So all good. We'll just move to tomorrow.
That'll give us some more time to prepare the press release that we're going to launch with a bunch of different organizations, including Hero Project and Americans for Safe Access and Michigan Normal, in order to support the decriminalization bill. So ice cream is not evil. Who wrote that? Blue Kiss Gardens? I love you so much, but ice cream is beautiful.
Yeah, the old glyphosate issue.
Sherbet. Yeah.
Also found in Roundup.
Ice cream is not found in Roundup.
No, but I'm reading the Theo's.
Glyphosate, yes. Yeah. Glyphosate is. And you know who's a real big glyphosate expert? That would be Gus Rosania from the University of Michigan, who talks about
School of Pharmacy.
Oh, he talks about that all the time and the damage that we do. That's another thing. We don't have a lot of time left, but clearly there's a disparity between the way that we punish certain things and we don't punish certain things.
By the way, Russ teaches one of the few cannabis classes at the University of Michigan. It's a little bit behind. Many universities are embracing whole programs and stuff like that. He had a class in the School of Pharmacy, and some new dean or something like that came in and got in the way of it.
Whose Pharmacology 420 was the class.
Yeah. And Rick and I were slated to be guest lecturers. I ended up getting
we deserve to speak to college students.
Well, recently I did that with Lake Superior State. It was very cool. But
good for you. And we've spoken to we spoke to U of M, Michigan, Dearborn.
Yeah, with Dr. Whitty,
University of Michigan students. We've done a lot of different things like that, but it's just sort of fun to make fun of us. So we do that sometimes. And that's really, other nations don't allow glyphosate. Other nations don't allow Roundup. And in America, what happens is when the Americans ban a pesticide, they just sell it in Latin America. They just sell it in Africa. So the pharmaceutical companies or the chemical companies continue to make bank on something that's really pretty much been proven by the best scientists in the world, we like to think, that it's no damn good. So why do we allow them to do that? Why do we allow the poisoning of human beings just because they don't live within our contiguous borders? It's wrong. So the greater awareness of what's going on in the world.
So Jen is talking about if we'd like to speak with college students in Tennessee to let her know.
Wow. Okay. If I desire to do that, I will.
If they're interested in this type of conversation, I absolutely would like to.
I'd like to go do that in
person.
Had
a grad student today call me as prearranged interviews out of DC area, is doing some research on social equity and came across the discrepancy of the industry associations, MCMA and NMICIA, and actually called me up and asked me what I thought about the difference. And that, Brad, is the big money interest versus those who have more of a historical and cultural understanding of cannabis.
Two different trade organizations with completely different philosophies.
Hey, what about this Delta 8 stuff? Have you guys talked about that on here?
We have, and there's been some law changes associated with that, and we went through all that, and that's now how it's under the commercial system now, if that product ever is going to be sold commercially again.
It's what now?
It's housed underneath the regular marijuana program now.
Because you can that's everywhere now, right?
It used to be. It's waning now. I mean, you can still, I actually did see it in some stores recently again, but as of October, it was no longer supposed to be. Right. Only sold through the regular retail cannabis stores and all that now in that system now.
Well, you will still see some Delta 8 being sold in shopping malls and gas stations around because the Marijuana Regulatory Agency doesn't regulate those particular industries. It only regulates the licensed cannabis industries they control. So they require the Michigan State Police to do enforcement action against Delta 8 in those other smaller places, and that ain't happening.
Somebody would have to care. I saw some in a pharmacy the other day, and I pointed out to them, you know, like as of October, that becomes a little bit, really, shaky. But I said, as long as nobody gives a shit, then, good for you. And then a lot of people talk when that was readily available. There were a lot of people who liked it. preferred it over Delta 9 stuff. Oh,
I heard it described as gas station weed, so now I understand why.
One of the things we do here in Michigan is we try and tell people how to keep themselves safe. And you have to look at the source of a lot of things that are going on. And sometimes, gas stations were the home of bath salts and K2 and spice and all those horrible things. You have to consider the source sometimes. You should consider the source all the time when it comes to information. You should probably consider the source all the time when it comes to things you put inside your body as well. So, gas station sushi is like a Saturday Night Live running joke, right? But gas station CBD ain't that much different, people.
Yeah. Well, some of it's good, some of it is not.
That's
and,
Well, yep. Doctor, it's been a wonderful time speaking with you today, Brad. We certainly appreciate your time.
Yeah, man, and all these conversations that we've had on this issue have been particularly interesting and enlightening, and just happy to know that there's people with your perspective working very seriously, on a high level of research on these types of things. And that's very much appreciated.
Well, thanks for having me on here, y'all. Happy to come on and chat again. So let me know where you need me.
No, thank you very much. If people wanted to get a hold of you, learn more about the program, if people wanted to participate, perhaps donate cannabis flower, as they've heard Pam talk about previously, how could they get a hold of you or perhaps learn more about your mission?
You can email me at bradray@gmail.com. That's my personal email. But I mean, for that type of stuff, I think Pam is the person to talk to.
Great.
Pam and Becca.
Pam and Becca, yeah, okay.
Fantastic. We have been joined by House Representative Yousef Rabhi. Representative Rabhi, thank you very much for joining us on Jazz Cabbage Cafe.
Hello, happy to be here.
So we were just talking with Dr. Brad Ray about, he's done a lot of research in the field and is very experienced with harm reduction and what that means and how cannabis has been very helpful with that. And and we think that maybe this bill that we're about ready to discuss could indirectly help out with keeping people out of jail, keeping people from getting into trouble over cannabis still, even though we've already come so far in this state. So please, you said he couldn't have gotten introduced today just because of timing, but the reality is we're just about ready to see a bill that would take cannabis off of the state's controlled substances list.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you all for inviting me to be on today. So today was supposed to be a historic day for us to be able to introduce this legislation, but fortunately it'll have to be tomorrow, March 2nd. Not that big of a deal, but we will be dropping this bill tomorrow morning. And essentially what this bill does is it says, look, we are, as a state, we have legalized medical, we have legalized adult use, and now we need to clean up our law books to basically say, look, why is cannabis still a scheduled substance? It's unacceptable. It's not how things should be. And we have evolved in our thinking as a state. Our citizens have evolved in their thinking on this issue. And it is time for us to pass a law that will just not reschedule it, but completely deschedule it, take it off as a scheduled substance. It should not be on there at all. So I'm very proud to be the sponsor of that legislation. We've gotten several people to co-sponsor the bill. So very proud to be doing this. And again, hopefully we'll be introduced tomorrow and I'll have a bill number for you at that point.
Right on, and that's really what we have time for, but that was perfect because that's what it's all about. And it's very much appreciated.
Yeah.
And
every good idea needs a legislative sponsor to believe in it. And you have believed in descheduling since the first time it ever hit in anyone's mind. You've always been behind this. And thanks for following through all the way.
Well, absolutely. And I've appreciated the partnership with you guys too. And everybody, on this call, and even folks that are listening from home, this is a team effort. We're all in this together and we can get it done if we work together. So thanks again for having me on and for hosting this program.
Right on. We'll do it again too in a few weeks and just maybe talk about like how we've been able to have this discussion more open and point to this tangible bill and all the things we're hoping to get out of this.
Representative, one thing before you go, we had a question earlier today about the federal schedule versus the state schedule. And it is true that there are two different schedules and that there are different substances sometimes on different schedules. This really will still impact the things that happen in the state, even though it's not associated with the corresponding federal change, right?
Well, that's true. Frankly, a lot of laws in the state of Michigan still, frankly, criminalize cannabis in a variety of different settings. And those are state laws, not federal laws. So if we can deschedule it, there's sort of a cascading effect that it will have throughout our law books on a bunch of different areas And that can all happen without a change in the federal scheduling. And in addition to that, I would say that if we can change the scheduling issue at the state level, we open up the door for our representatives and our senators in Washington to be able to bring this fight and amplify this fight in the halls of Washington so that we can eventually get this descheduled nationally. So I think this helps in that effort as well.
Great. Yeah, that's wonderful information. Thank you so much for leading the fight on this.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for popping in just for a couple minutes to go over that. That's much appreciated.
We'll have you
man.
for a longer segment on when you're able to.
Yeah, sorry about
Thank you,
session
Robbie.
today. It just ran long, but I appreciate you guys for having me.
Thanks again.
Jim Salame's trying to get in a little extra.
Hey,
grease.
I just want to say thank you, Rep. Robbie. You're the best, man. I
Awesome.
love everything about you. Top, from the beginning till now and beyond. So
Appreciate you, brother.
One
Thank
of
you.
our champions in the house, main cat in the house. That's for sure. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Good to see you all. Appreciate it.
Again.
And hey, we're at the end. So Rick, I guess if anybody else wants to add something in here,
Anton, did you want to jump in real quick?
it's almost time to party.
Another great condo. Yeah, let's get our party on.
Let's get our party on.
Cannabis,
Jim,
Yeah, I wish I could be there with you guys. That would be a lot of fun. But I'm not smoking or doing any
you're
other.
getting ready for your own therapeutic trip for
I am.
for reasons to, as Anton suggested, to
That's right. That's right. I'm
that's
cleaning
very
it up
cool.
a little bit. But you guys have a great time, and can't wait to hear how it went next week.
right.
Thanks, Jim. And we're all looking forward to that bill dropping tomorrow. We'll keep you up to date. Of course, you can follow us, Jazz Cabbage Cafe, on YouTube, on Facebook, Spotify, Alexa, all the different podcasting platforms. We'll try and keep you updated on this progression of the decrim bill, no doubt.
Right on, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We'll be back next week. Another good discussion.
Good
And looking forward to officially tomorrow, descheduled bill being introduced. All right, Jazz Cabbage Cafe, everybody.
Bye.
See you next week. Bye. Anton over here. Bye.